That is.
I know, gosh.
Do full screen mode. Full screen mode. Okay. Before we discuss Goya or the rest of the Rococo period, we need to. What's this?
What's
What
this?
in the heck is this?
Oh, just push the X, yeah.
Marketing.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Do you see the tools up here, or are they not showing to you?
no, not in view. You just see the black screen.
Oh, okay, good. Because I see them. I'm just getting them out of the way. Anyway, we have to, you know, Velázquez, I decided not to do a long thing on him, as great an artist as he is, because there are so many artists to cover. He's in some ways a painter's painter. He is one of the more accomplished artists with the brush. And he's one of the great artists of he's the great Spanish artist of the Baroque period. He's also sort of at the beginning of really major artists in Spain. They didn't have a strong artistic tradition before this. He is the artist of the Golden Age, when Spain was at its highest power and most effectively ruled. And this is his portrait. He also spent time in Italy, of course. This is his portrait of Pope Innocent X, which is just a magnificent portrait, in my opinion.
It is. I was almost going to swear. I won't, but it's gorgeous. I mean, it's just mind-blowingly gorgeous to me.
And look at the handling of the chair behind the Pope. How when he gets to this side, he plays down the gilt, and because he wants the face to show. He's created a darker area, and he's also playing this down as if maybe it's in shadow. So in fact, from the way the lighting is, it wouldn't be in shadow. But we don't notice this unless we analyze the painting. And the handling of the silk here is just incredible. But also the portraiture itself, very objective and very powerful. He's on a par. You can see that he's really absorbed Caravaggio.
Is that a?
Why is it not moving on?
Is that a purple in that shadow in the background, Anthony?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I don't think so. It's where? In here?
Yeah.
No, it's black.
Oh, it's just black. Oh.
You know, it starts to pick up other colors because of the strength of the color around it.
Okay.
No, it's not. It's an incredibly limited palette if you look at it closely and analyze it. It's your basic chiaroscuro palette. Okay. Yes. Oops. Ay. There. This is a very famous painting of his, the surrender of the city of Breda, where the Spanish prevailed. And it's a brilliant piece of painting. There's also a piece of propaganda. The thing about Velázquez is he was a social climber. I mean, utterly talented, but he was also interested in very much concerned about his position in society. He collected titles as he went up, as he climbed in the court, becoming the court painter, and still gathering more titles. And this painting presents the Spanish general, who actually was someone that Velázquez traveled to Italy with, as a very generous picture. And we see some of the people who are surrendering here, the soldiers. This guy looking out at us. It's got a sense of variety of class, and there's a bunch of other. If you look at it, you can read a lot of stories into it. It's a very beautifully composed painting. This is his most famous painting and one of the most famous paintings of the Baroque period, Las Meninas, which means the maids in waiting. And this is Velázquez here, the court painter. Who is he painting? Because he's looking at us out of the painting. In the mirror, the king and queen in the distance. So presumably he's painting the king and queen.
Right.
And this is their daughter, the Infanta, being very carefully, very thoughtfully attended by her two maids in honor here. And then we have the court dwarf. All courts in those days had dwarfs as well as jesters. And I'm not sure about the others. There's obviously a nun here. But here is a man, Velázquez, who is completely at home in the court. In fact, he's made the court his home. And so, brilliant artist who is completely at peace with the social order and very, very successful within it. It's important to keep in mind when we look at Goya. Goya is born 80 years after the death of Velázquez. He studies him as he climbs and enters the court. He studies him closely. In fact, he does a number of etchings of Velázquez's work. He studies him very closely. So it's important to be aware of this artist who was indeed a very important artist. But now we move on from here. I guess we lost Robert. Oh, well. We move on from here.
No, I'm here. Just having to deal with the dogs off and on. So
okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
We move on from here to the Rococo period and the leading Rococo artists who are in France. I am not a fan of Rococo. It's very self-indulgent, very frivolous. The artists are brilliant. Technically, they're brilliant. I mean, how can you criticize someone who can paint like this? But this is the Feast of Love, and here's Venus and Cupid, appropriately, and it's people indulging. And the problem really with Rococo is it reflects a court, initially the court of Louis XV and then 16th, that is more concerned with pleasure than with ruling, which leads to a disaster eventually. Boucher, who, look at this marzipan nude here, brilliantly painted. By the way, Renoir loved these painters, and in his later work, you can see him emulating them in his plump marzipan nudes, which actually make me feel bilious. This is an opinionated art history that I'm giving you.
Yes,
You don't have to agree with me. And this is the most notorious and most famous of all the Rococo paintings. And this was commissioned by this guy here. He approached a number of Rococo paintings, and Fragonard was the only one who would take on this commission. He is on the ground looking up his mistress's skirt, who is kicking off one of her shoes, while apparently her husband, unaware of what's going on, is swinging her. So it was somewhat, shocking even to French society, but it made Fragonard's name, and he was immensely successful. And in fact, you can see he's a brilliant painter. I mean, technically, what can you say? I mean, the guy can paint anything and paint it very well and create a really interesting composition. You have this diagonal here, right? And then you have this diagonal here. And she sits at the junction of the two diagonals. It's a very strong and very well composed painting, but I can't stand it.
Do you think it's the subject matter or like the fairy tale?
It's a bit of both. I mean, the subject matter, okay. I don't care what the subject matter is that much. I mean, and I'm not particularly outraged by it, but the frivolity of it, and also something about the this fantastical painting that just doesn't appeal to me at all.
Anthony,
yes.
Oh, excuse me. What does the word Rococo mean? Does it mean?
Rococo
The
it
word
actually
itself?
refers to decorations that used shells.
Yeah.
And
Oh.
it began in furniture and spread to painting. And then the word embraced first the movement in France, but then the whole period, because this style spread to some degree throughout much of Europe.
Architecture too, right?
Yes, architect. Oh, yes. It's a
Mhm.
kind of an exaggerated form of Baroque.
I see. But it means made out of shell.
Well, it doesn't
The word
necessarily
is, I
mean
was just
anything.
curious, yes. But
Yeah.
I see. Mm-hmm.
But now in Venice, there was also a very important Rococo artist who, you know, isn't quite as self-indulgent and is a brilliant technician. Giovanni Battista Tiepolo. And one of the reasons I show him, well, there's two reasons. One is he's a contemporary of Canaletto's. This was considered great painting in Venice. This is what the Venetians preferred. They didn't think much of Canaletto until he became world famous, or famous throughout Europe anyway. This is actually supposed to be Cleopatra having a feast, and I would imagine this is Antony. Set, of course, in Renaissance, well, post-Renaissance Italy, but very brilliantly done. This is the other aspect, the more fantastic aspect of his work. And this is actually part of a ceiling in the palace in Madrid. He was painting this for Charles III, celebrating the vast Spanish Empire, which, you know, had a huge reach at this point. Most huge portion of the whole of the Americas, the Philippines, where else? Somewhere in the east too. I'm forgetting where else, but this was being painted at the time that Goya was applying to the Academy in Madrid and being rejected twice over a period of 2 years. And he was studying with the court painter Mengs at the time. And Mengs was very, very jealous of Tiepolo and actually managed to stand in the way of him being as successful as he might have been in the Spanish court. That's backstory that we'll go back to in a minute. Francisco Goya. He doesn't show great genius in the beginning. He struggles like crazy. He comes from very humble origins. As I said, he studies with a local painter, goes to Madrid, studies with Mengs, who he has a fight with, tries to get in the academy, fails twice, and will eventually go to Italy for 2 years. But first, this is his birthplace, a humble place. His father was a gilder, so he was a craftsman of sorts, but very limited in his skill and in the amount of money he made. He goes to Italy, and there are a lot of stories. We don't know if they're true or not. One story is that he went with a bunch of bullfighters and he supported himself as a juggler on the street. There are all kinds of stories about Goya because we don't know very much. This was the last painting he did in Italy while he was painting there and studying with Italian artists. It was for a contest excuse me, I'm just forgetting. In Parma, excuse me, there was a contest, painting contest in Parma, and he got second prize. And the commission was very specific. It had to be Hannibal as he's crossed the Alps and is being shown the lands of Italy, which he will conquer by an angel. It doesn't look anything like Goya's later work, but it's quite accomplished. And he used the fact that he'd won second prize in Italy to advance himself when he went back to Spain. He worked in the workshop, joined the workshop of Joseph Bayeux, and worked with him doing jobs for Bayeux. Finally, getting a commission to paint a number of huge cartoons, I mean, enormous, for tapestries. And he also married Bayeux's sister, Josefa. And this is a portrait of his wife, Josefa, who I think is quite a beautiful portrait, actually. Feel free to make comments if something impresses you as we go along. But it shows that he has an incredible eye for real life detail. This is one of his early cartoons or tapestries. These paintings, which are the same size as the tapestries, so they might be 10, 15 feet high, were used. They weren't intended as great paintings, though they still exist, and they're now on display in Spain. But they were used by the tapestry makers who would match the colors. But you can see here the influence of Rococo, but much, much more restrained in Spain. For one, well, maybe many reasons, but one of them is that they had the Inquisition in Spain, which was policing everything. By the way, as we will see later, Goya hated the Inquisition, had very little respect for the church. This is another, I think, a wonderful cartoon for a tapestry, because you really get a sense of life in Spain at the time. And you can see he has a real eye for the everyday details and for ordinary life. This old woman here is beautifully portrayed. The guy who's selling the pottery and the woman who's considering buying here. And then the woman trapped in the carriage, obviously an aristocrat, sort of trapped in her carriage, passing by, not able to stop and really, enjoy the everyday life that's around her. And this one, these are obviously aristocrats here, being waited on by a maid or a field worker with grapes. They're trying the grapes here. But look, he includes the field workers picking the grapes and a wonderful landscape behind. It's really a masterful painting, and it shows that even when he's celebrating the aristocracy, he's still a man of the people. So while he's doing these, he's working his way up in the court. And you can see him here. He's painting a man who at the time was the foreign minister and had under Charles III. And I should say a little bit about the government of Spain at this time. Charles III had been the ruler of Naples and had done incredible work modernizing Naples, so that Naples became one of the most modern and populous cities in Europe at the time. When his father dies, he goes back to Spain and becomes king of Spain. And he's liberal, and he actually attempts to modernize Spain. The infrastructure of Spain, the agriculture of Spain had been completely neglected because of the wealth that was coming into Spain from the New World. And all that wealth was being spent on wars. It was an incredible waste. He tried to make a difference, and he had a very able foreign minister in this man, who would lose his office because he, after the death of Charles III and his son Charles IV takes power, his wife, Charles IV's wife, Maria Luise di Parma, takes control of the state because her husband, Charles IV, wasn't interested. And she becomes very close, in fact, too close to an advisor who she eventually promotes all the way up to prime minister. But she's also almost certainly his lover. And this foreign minister denounced her and lost his job as a result of that. That's later in the story than right now. At this point, what's interesting is Goya holding a mirror up to the foreign minister in a very subservient role, obviously social climbing in the court. But there's something awkward about this painting. You can see almost in this painting that Goya is not that happy with the process. Around this time, around the time he starts to actually enter the court, be appointed as official court painter, and he's working incredibly hard to advance himself and do these massive paintings for the tapestries, he gets very sick and almost dies. And he goes partially blind for a while, but he loses his hearing permanently, and he has a terrible case of tinnitus for the rest of his life, where he hears thunder all the time, terrible noises. And he thinks he's going mad. And the way he deals with this is to paint the horrific visions that are haunting him. And this is one of the first. This is actually a memory he has of an asylum that he saw in his hometown when he was a child. These two inmates of the asylum are fighting. The warden of the asylum is beating them. And the others are just, one guy's rocking, and God knows what this one is doing. It's a really disturbing painting. And it's the beginning of his dark paintings, which will distinguish his work and which open up a whole new realm in painting that had not existed before. No one had ever painted a painting like this before. And he's not doing it for the public. He's doing it for himself. It's his form of therapy, actually. So he continues on this theme, and he actually, for a while, finds patrons for some of these paintings. The Duke and Duchess of Asuna in Italy buy 5 of his paintings treating witches' Sabbaths, of which this is one. What's going on here? He doesn't believe in witches. He doesn't believe in witches' Sabbaths. He is himself a person of the Enlightenment, and he was encouraged in that by the court of Charles III, which was a very enlightened leadership at the time. And Charles IV is sympathetic still to liberal ideas. And what he's painting here is his satire of the superstitions of the Spanish people and the way these superstitions are used by the Inquisition, which he absolutely hates, but has to be very careful not to offend them. So he never commits any of his thoughts or feelings to words, but they show up in these paintings. Well, shortly thereafter, after he's moved into the court and got to know, actually, it's the man who's way too close to the queen and probably her lover, Godoy. he forms a friendship with Godoy, and Godoy encourages him to do a series of prints of his dark fantasies, these horrible feeling images that appear to him. And the result is 80 etchings, which the theme is the sleep of reason produces monsters. It's also a critique of the way Spain was going, because he could clearly observe in this new court that they were not really practicing wise statecraft anymore. And he probably was quite critical privately of Godoy, who had befriended him. This is a woman who's going to her death because the Inquisition has sentenced her. There was no remedy, is what he's put under there. It's a pretty haunting image. There are images in here. There are some incredibly haunting images. I'm only showing a couple. This one is fascinating to me. It's neither more nor less. I'm not sure what he's saying here, but it's a very clever image. The artist is not receiving very good treatment here. The subject is obviously not being flattered. And what's interesting is that the image being painted on the canvas is a mixture of the two of them, which I think may be the point. The artist neither paints his subjects, he paints both himself and his subject at the same time. It's neither one nor the other.
Yeah, to me, it's looking back at that other painting where he has that holding that mirror up. Like it, I feel like
right.
Yeah,
right.
He possibly just feels like he's the monkey that has to do what he's told.
I think that's a good interpretation. Yeah. And this is his way of saying it. I think that's a very good interpretation, actually.
He's painting the ass.
Yes.
All the asses.
He's the monkey who's painting the ass.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's what he really feels about the court. Okay, so he's now, in 1800, he becomes the official court painter because the Queen likes him, and the Queen makes all the decisions now. A very opinionated Italian woman from one of the princely families of Italy. The city-states of Italy spent their time placing their children in the powerful families throughout Italy. It was a wise thing to do. So he's given the job of painting the royal family, and he paints this picture, which is huge. These figures are life-size. Now, this canvas was assembled in his studio from studies he painted studies from life of each of these figures, and then he assembled them into this painting in his studio. But the conceit is that the family has gathered for a group portrait. Why exactly he's in the background if he's painting them, I don't know. It seems like it's a reference to Velázquez, but it doesn't really make sense. And this painting has often been cited as a satire of the royal family. I don't think that's what was going on. He would not have purposely painted a satire. I mean, it wouldn't help his climbing in the court. I think it was that he had to paint what he saw, and what he saw was not particularly admirable here. But he painted them realistically enough that they accepted this painting. I think they liked it. We look at it and we're a little bit shocked. This is the king, Charles III. This is Maria Luisa di Parma. This is the king's brother back here. This is the king's son, eldest son, who will take over the title. He will become Philip VII at a point where the family has been divided, and he does not allow his father and mother to return to Spain. But that's a long story, which I can only tell you a little bit of because the conflict in Spain was unbelievably complex and horrific. But here we are, a family that will lead to just chaos in Spain. Not particularly bad people, I have to say. They were liberal for the time. This is Godoy, who probably was the Queen's lover. He was a member of the Guard who ends up becoming prime minister in general. And without really, I mean, a smart man, but without the qualifications. Here he is. This is a painting painted to celebrate his victory in the War of Oranges, which was a war that Spain proceeded to make on little Portugal with the help of the French troops. Godoy, the family in Spain decided not to oppose Napoleon, but to work with him, which was a disastrous mistake. And to deal with their conflict with Spain, they invited the French troops into their country, which was, was really asking for trouble. Godoy, though, thought he'd been very victorious. He had not really distinguished himself very much as a general. It was almost a stalemate, except they got Portugal to agree to stop being an ally of the British, which served French interests largely. And it's called the War of the Oranges because he plucked an orange branch with oranges on it and came back to the Queen in Spain and gave her the orange branch. But it's a very interesting portrait. I mean, the painting of his figure and the general color scheme is very powerful, very effective, I think.
I've noticed a lot of those papers, like open, either they're on the floor or somebody's holding them. Is there any like symbolism behind them?
Say that again.
The paper that he's holding?
Well, he's in the battlefield here, considering probably strategy or looking at a map, or maybe reading a message from someone else here. That's more likely because there's a horse here. But he's considering strategy. I mean, he looks awfully relaxed for someone in the battlefield, doesn't he? A lot of people also said this was a satire, but I think Goya never could really paint these people with the same kind of gravitas that Velázquez gave to the royal family in his time, because Goya was not totally happy with what he was seeing. Okay, we all know this nude, the Maha, the nude Maha. This was commissioned by Godoy. And he had a room with a lot of a private room in his house with paint nudes around the walls, because he was a lover. He had a wife, he had a mistress, and he presumably was part-time lover of the Queen as well. It's a nude which later gets Godoy and Goya into trouble. It's one of the first nudes. It's one of the first nudes in Western art where you see the pubic hair, and which doesn't have any sort of allegory attached to it. It's just a nude woman looking at us invitingly. But there's another thing that's odd. Look at the head. I haven't seen this in the literature, but look at that head. It's way too big for the body. If you actually measure her, she's 5 heads high.
Yeah.
Which, and it almost looks like the head's been plastered on.
Mm-hmm.
It occurred to me that someone else was painted and then they didn't want to be recognized, so Goya put another face on there. I don't know.
Looks like her arms are a little too masculine or a little too big for her little waist and her stature.
I thought that too.
Her arms, right? Don't they look a little bit like
bodybuilder? Something on the top.
It's an unusual painting. I mean, it's sometimes been. It was said at one time that this was actually Goya's lover, but it's more likely, if it was anyone, that they knew that it was it was actually Godoy's lover, because he had a lover at the time, young lover. But it was, another painting was painted to be the companion. Now in this one, the head is the right scale for the body.
Mm-hmm.
This was painted several years later though. So, but there was the Spanish people were very unhappy with Godoy and his closeness to the Queen. And at one point a mob broke into his house and discovered this room with the nudes and contacted the Inquisition. So both Godoy and Goya had to face the Inquisition.
Mm.
Godoy got off fairly easily because he just owned the paintings, but Goya had painted it. And Goya's defense was, well, Velázquez painted a nude and Charles III had it in his room. Of course, it was not provocative like this nude. It was a nude from the back, very traditional. But that got him off, partly because under these two liberal kings, the Inquisition wasn't as powerful as it had been in Spain. But he had something to say about the Inquisition after that. And this is his painting, which is, I think, very powerful and haunting painting. Again, painted for himself. He had no buyer for this. But this was his way of dealing with the things that were happening. Remember, the man is now deaf and hearing incredible noises in his head, and he's doing all this creative stuff at the same time. At the same time, he was doing beautiful portraits. This was a woman who came in when he was painting someone else's portrait, the niece of his subject. And when Goya saw her, he said, "May I paint her?" And he painted this lovely portrait. It shows what an incredible portraitist he was and how he could really grasp the essence of a person.
I love the palette.
Yeah, it's incredibly restrained, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And that gold.
Yes. And I mean, he's the equal of Rembrandt here, in my opinion.
Mm.
And of course, he's famous for his mahas on the balconies. There are several of these. Maha referred to poor women, but the fashion that the poor had created for themselves actually was imitated by the aristocracy. They were sort of it's a little like the white suburban kids, getting into rap. The aristocracy imitated the impoverished people, because most people in Spain were very poor. These are probably prostitutes, and these either their clients or their Johns. We don't know. And they kind of tower over them. There's a certain sense of threat, actually, even in this painting.
Mm.
So during this period, things have gone from bad to worse in Spain. Napoleon's armies march in, and he eventually arrests the king, queen, and Godoy. And after much argument with them, he imprisons them in France, and he installs his brother Joseph as the king of Spain. And Goya is in the position where he has to serve the French rulers, which he doesn't really like, and he keeps them at arm's length as much as he can. But meanwhile, privately, he starts to work on a series of paintings called, a series of lithographs called The Disasters of War, which are not actually shown until 30 years after his death. Because some of them, they weren't just critical of the brutality of the French, but also of the Spanish and of the church. But here you see citizens fighting soldiers, because the conflict in Spain was largely constant citizen revolts from one end of Spain to the other. Bloody, bloody revolts. It was just a horrendous period in Spanish history. Here, a citizen has just taken over a cannon and is continuing the battle, and you can see what valor is the. There were other ones that you should really go online and look at both these series, the Caprichos, which were the earlier ones, and the Disasters of War. There's about 81 in this series. I didn't really want to put, some of them are so upsetting, I didn't really want to put them on tonight, but you can see his incredible ability in doing etchings. He's an utter master of it, the form. And these treatments of violence and horror and nightmares are totally new in Western art. It makes him actually the first of the moderns. And you would define him probably as one of the first of the romantics, because the word romantic maybe suggests things that it shouldn't. In the context of art, that what the romantics really were was the beginning of a rebellion against the status quo. It's the first time in Western history where artists are not celebrating the world around them, either the world of the aristocracy or the world of the middle class. They're starting to reject it and either try to escape it or critique it. And Goya was a very bitter critic of the status quo.
Anthony, would all of these artists, was there like a cross training that occurred when you studied that you would have learned to do etchings, drawing, painting, or did they just naturally I was just curious about that, because I'm always amazed to see like such skill in these completely different mediums.
Well, there are different forms that come on. I mean, the first one is woodblock, which was very easy to print and broadcast widely. And then there was engraving, which required a much more powerful press. And then finally there's etching. So he's picking up etching. He's picking it up probably because it's a fairly new medium. He will at the very end of his life, when he's a really old man, I mean, he's in his late 70s, early 80s, he will pick up lithography when he's going partially blind, actually. We'll see that in a minute. He constantly developed, and he was constantly, I think he was someone who always wanted to explore, what was new. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the leading artists pretty much always did that, because that's why they're leading artists. This is called the 2nd of May, around 1812, when the French threat was beginning to recede, at a time when, interestingly, the citizens of Spain gathered together with the citizens of the territories throughout the world and held a constitutional convention and wrote a new liberal constitution for Spain that was the most advanced European constitution written up until that time. During that time, he starts to paint 2 paintings that really are some of the greatest anti-war paintings ever painted. Here, the people are in revolt. They're attacking French troops, Zouaves, I believe, who are part of the French forces in an incredibly violent uprising against them. That's called the 2nd of May. The 3rd of May, the French had gained control and they massacred the rebels. And actually, this guy here could be this guy here. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but it's interesting. Mm-hmm. But this, to me, this is a greater and more powerful anti-war painting than even Guernica. It's just heartbreaking painting. And unprecedented in the history of Western art at the time. It would be imitated by many other artists, including Manet. So he continues to, okay, so what happens is that the Ferdinand VII takes over, the son of Charles Charles IV takes over and banishes his family. It's kind of complicated. They're banished, they go to Italy. Godoy, the queen and the king live together in Italy in a palace that the Pope gives them, the Palazzo Barberini, and never come back to Spain. Ferdinand VII takes over, reinstitutes the Inquisition, and institutes a reign of terror. And this is presumably Goya's commentary. You see someone in a tricorner hat here, which would suggest the French fighting an invisible foe. You see someone who might be a king here. And then you see someone who might be a pope blessing us. It's his commentary on the state of society, that basically the world is ruled by madmen and we live in a madhouse. And, you know, this seems fairly appropriate to our moment in history too, doesn't it? Unfortunately. Very, very powerful painting. And it is the precursor to some even more disturbing paintings, which come after another bout. He has another bout with a very serious illness when he's 72, and he's nursed back to health by this doctor in this painting. This painting was painted by Goya in thanks to this doctor who saved his life. It's a very powerful painting. And Goya does look like he's about to die here.
Mhm.
So Goya goes into seclusion in a house which is known as the House of the Dead Man. I always thought it was named that, Quinta del Sordo, because Goya was deaf, but in fact it had previously been owned by a deaf man. And he secludes himself in this house with his maid. His wife has died, and proceeds to cover all the walls of the house with these horrific paintings. This one we think is Saturn devouring his children. We don't know because Goya left us no written information about these paintings. One wonders how he managed to live in a house with these paintings, but apparently they gave him some sort of solace. It was his therapy. This is a very haunting one also in La Quinta del Sordo. Some people have suggested that this is a reference to Gibraltar, where the liberals fled when they discovered that their constitution was not going to be accepted, and they were actually attacked and slaughtered by by Ferdinand VII. But we don't know. It's really, I mean, you see in his work not just the beginnings of modernism, but the beginnings of surrealism too. So he eventually feels like he's threatened by what is happening in Spain, and he goes across the border into Bordeaux in France, where he will die. But while he's there, he takes up lithography, and he does a series of 4 lithographs of bullfights in Bordeaux. At the time, they had bullfighting in Bordeaux. And here a picador is caught on the horns of the bull. But he'd never done lithography before. It's quite incredible what he does. The person who helped him, who was a lithographer, described him as working in a very unusual way. he would take the stone, he'd put it up on his easel as if it was a canvas. He'd cover the entire stone with the grease stick, and then he would scrape away slowly back to the stone, just finding a bit of an image here, a bit of an image there, until he created his whole image. He also needed a magnifying glass because his sight was failing at the time. But even these are kind of dark. Even when he's painting everyday life, he takes a violent and dark subject. This is one of his last paintings. It's known as the Montmaid of Bordeaux, but it may well have been a painting of the woman who accompanied him into exile, Leocardia Weiss, who was a very fiery, apparently extremely fiery Spanish woman, known for her temper. And they used to have these huge fights, apparently, but they were very, very close. And some people think they were lovers, other people, she was 35 years younger than him. And she may just have been a loyal friend, actually, who nursed him at the end of his life. Well, that's the end of the series.